it's Thistle and Verse, and today I will be reviewing Dominion, an anthology of speculative fiction from Africa and the African diaspora, edited by Ekepeki, Oghenechovwe Donald, and Zelda Knight. I received an advance produced copy of this book in exchange for a fair and honest review. Thank you to Ekepeki, Oghenechovwe Donald for reaching out. All opinions are my own. I was looking at the lineup and I recognized quite a few of the names. So Nicole Givens Kurtz has a Weird West short story anthology out and a sci-fi mystery, the Sybil Lewis trilogy. I recognize Eugene Bacon. She is the author of Claiming Timo, a space opera I'm really looking forward to reading. There's Nuzo Ono, known as the Queen of African Horror. There's Rafiat Aliyu, whose short stories I've read in Nightmare Magazine. There's Suyi Davies Okungbowa, author of David Mogo Godhunter, another highly anticipated novel for me. And Mame Bugoma Dien, who has short stories in Sunspot Jungle and Omenana. In terms of the genre breakdown, I'd say a good chunk of the stories are sort of genre blenders. There was one sci-fi and fantasy, but I felt like a good bit of them actually combined sci-fi and horror. But if I just had to pick one genre, I would say that of the 13 stories in here, 4 of them are horror, 6 are sci-fi, and 3 are fantasy. Most of the stories in here are short stories. There's 3 novelettes, so they have like chapters and headings, but they're not like novella length. And there was 1 poem. In terms of my overall thoughts, I liked that this anthology gave a brief synopsis of each story at the beginning. It made it a little bit easier to navigate. I read anthologies from like beginning to end, but I know some people like to skip around, and I imagine that would be helpful. And I liked how, by virtue of having all these different authors in the same anthology, it kind of puts them in conversation with each other. And I like seeing the different ways that all the authors handled language. Suyi Davies Okungbowa, I believe, used Nigerian dialect in his story. Some authors included phrases that aren't in English, and they had different approaches to how those were incorporated into the story. So some give translations, some don't. And if you get it, you get it. And if you don't get it, you can either Google, you can use context clues to figure it out. And I thought that the Ono story was funny, and that in this one, the narrating character translates all the words that she uses in Igbo to English, except for one. And this character is very prim and respectable for the most part, and it's very noticeable which one it was, and that I thought was humorous. I thought was a good bit of character development. In terms of how I felt about this anthology as a whole, when I do short story anthologies, I usually go through by highlights and then honorable mentions, and I had to like really rethink that system when it came to this anthology. A highlight for me is usually a story that makes me feel pretty intensely. It has descriptions that I like want to write down and share with others and like study like how the story was crafted, and also like rereadability. Like for me, highlights are stories that I want to reread like a few times. And I often do. I often get to the end of it and just go right back to the beginning and go through it again. And this anthology kind of challenged how I've thought about using like the highlights and honorable mentions to talk about stories, because while there were stories here that I enjoyed, there's not too many that I would reread in their entirety just because I have a low gore tolerance, and not all the stories in here are gory, but I felt like the ones that were my favorites were gory, and it was very contradictory and interesting. And at first I thought it was just because I wasn't vibing with the anthology, but I was watching other reviewers on Twitter who had received ARCs as well, specifically Kiki at Of This Is Paradise, and I realized that I was really looking forward to seeing her reactions to certain stories, and like there were certain stories I wanted to discuss with her. And so I was like, I don't know if the highlights and honorable mentions system really holds up to this anthology. So in terms of the stories overall, I'd say that there were cool concepts in all of them. Like I think for each story, I could name you like one central image or question or concept that I enjoyed and thought was cool, even if it wasn't necessarily a favorite. Because there are definitely short stories I read that I liked, where I'm like, I'm going to read more from this author. And also there were stories that I read and they weren't necessarily favorites, but I was like, I kind of want to see what else this author is doing. And before I get into my favorite stories, I'm going to give some general content warnings. I don't necessarily want to go through like each story and list them out. I felt like there's overlap, but I would just say that in general, just know that some of these stories are dealing with issues of spousal abuse, of rape, of anti-blackness. There's some characters who use ableist and transphobic slurs. There is some gore. So just things to keep in mind. So in terms of favorite stories, I'm just going to kind of go through based on the order they were in the anthology. Trickin' by Nicole Gibbons Kurtz. This is about a bloody Halloween. This just reminded me that I really like Halloween, which is weird because I'm such a scaredy cat. And it was just fun having a black main character in this Halloween story. I mean, the main character being black is kind of debatable, but you'd have to read the story to understand why that is. This story is one where the world is built kind of piece by piece. It starts off, you're just kind of thrown in the action and you're piecing together what's going on and why. So next one was The Unclean by Nuzo Ono. This is a story about a woman with a very troubled marriage. This woman might possibly be the most wretched woman to ever live, I tell you. I felt like everyone in the story either hates her or is too useless to help her deal with the people who hate her. There are haunted burial grounds with like creepy termite mounds. There are undead and ghostly apparitions. And as horrifying and gross as the supernatural creatures are in this story, maybe it's the humans who are the real monsters after all. Things to think about. For this one, I found the main character a bit annoying. I felt like the main character was like believable. It was just one of those frustrating situations where they have to make questionable decisions to move the plot. Another favorite was Convergence in Chorus Architecture by Dare Sagunfalowo. This is an alien abduction story where the life on Earth was as strange, at least to me, as the life in space. This story was like disturbing and surreal. I felt like Falowo took all these elements that on their own didn't make sense to me, like as isolated incidents, and then crafted it into something that had like a narrative arc. Like I was confused from beginning to end, but like I felt like it was a good confusion. This was a story that I think made me reckon with there are things in this universe that are unknown and unknowable. This is a story that involves transformations, it involves dealing with the fact that sometimes things change and they're never going to be the same again, and just having to build around that. Some of the imagery that stood out for me was like there's a scene where there's a hurricane and they're trying to salvage these crops from like underneath a foot of water. There's like the alien abduction that happens and like through a bone ship. And next one is Sleep Papa Sleep by Suyi Davies Okunbawa. This is about a man who works in a body market and he breaks a major rule, and there are some bizarre and icky consequences. This was a story that I was surprised at how much images haunted me, considering it felt like there's relatively little gore compared to some of the other stories. Like there's a supernatural being that shows up who is just so creepy and so threatening, even though it doesn't really do anything to harm anyone. And I feel like its appearance is as menacing for like what it looks like and what it signifies as for the characteristics that it brings out in the person that it visits. And I feel like that is also really amplified in the ending. I didn't guess the ending at all. I thought that things were kind of being lined up to have a pretty neat, tidy ending, and the ending was quite messy. Quite unexpected, and I think it was one of the situations where it really made me grapple with sometimes the supernatural and the unknown aren't scary in that they're supernatural and unknown. Sometimes they're scary in the things that they reveal about us and our reactions to them. So last favorite from the anthology was Satellite Charmer by Mame Bugoma Dien. This is a story about Chinese mining companies that are mining in Africa. It's virtual mining, so they send like a laser from a satellite to wherever they need to dig up the earth, and it is destroying African landscapes, and there's a point where it accidentally levels a town, and despite how intimidating and scary it is, the main character feels kind of drawn to it for reasons that he can't explain. This was another one that I enjoyed for being disturbing and surreal. I felt like this is a story where you spend a lot of it kind of puttering along, following the main character as he's learning things about himself, as he's fumbling through life and realizing what he wants. And then there's just something about the ending that feels very climactic and important and right. And sort of the main imagery from this story that stood out to me were descriptions of the effects of radiation poisoning that are jarring and vivid. Just the imagery around like the laser beam for mining and just like what it looks like and how it affects the air and like what it's like to stand near it and what the ground looks like after excavation. So that's all for the review. That's what I thought of this anthology. If you like the video, please hit the like button. Are you familiar with any of the authors from this anthology? This one is out this Monday, August 17th. Do you think you'll be giving it a read? If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It's a good way to stay up to date with me and my bookish activities. Thank you for watching. Have a good one. Goodbye.